The shoreline was already on fire when we got close enough to smell it. Not a clean fire either. This was the kind that eats slow, like it's chewing on somebody's past. Smoke rolling low over the water, thick enough to hide a rifle barrel. And behind me, packed tight on that little steamer like bodies in a church aisle, almost 200 souls holding their breath like the wrong exhale might bring the old world back. That's how power traps start. Quiet, crowded, no exit you can trust. A man in a government coat stood beside me, blue faded to the color of tired promises. He squinted at the islands like they were numbers he didn't know how to count. "Sea islands," he said, like naming it made it his. He watched the flames and smiled the kind of smile men wear when they think the law is a weapon they're holding by the handle. "Planters ran when the army came," he went on. "You'll need a firm hand out here." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "A firm hand is what put those people on that deck," I told him. "What they need is ground under their feet that doesn't belong to anybody else." He made a sound in his throat, half laugh, half spit. "The courts will settle it." I looked at him the way you look at a man who still believes paper can stop a hungry dog. "Will they?" I asked. He didn't answer. I didn't either. The whistle screamed and the boat angled toward the biggest patch of land in that smoking chain, a crescent of marsh and oak that the old owners used to call by some sweet name like sugar could cover blood. But the folks behind me had a different name for it already. Not official, not safe, a name made of rumor and need. They called it the General's Island, not because there was a general there, because they were praying for one. The deck boards shuddered as we bumped the pier. Rough wood, old nails. The kind of dock built to ship crops and bodies depending on the season. I adjusted my glasses, the lenses fogging with salt. I could feel every eye behind me, heavy as hands on my shoulders. People think leadership is loud. It AI. Leadership is when you can feel the fear in a crowd and still keep your voice steady. I wasn't a preacher, not the way the officer wanted to believe. I had stood in pulpits, sure. I had spoken words in rooms where words were illegal. I had walked with soldiers and helped recruit men who'd never held anything but a hoe, then watched them hold rifles like they were born with them. But out here I wasn't a holy man. I was a decision. Inside my coat, pressed flat against my chest, were two things. One was the government paper that said I had authority over land and labor in this district. Ink, seal, the kind of document that made men in Washington sleep easy. The other was a folded page I wrote myself, one sentence, no seal, no permission. No one owns us again. A little girl stared up at me from the lower deck as the plank dropped. 8 years old, maybe. Dress torn at the shoulder, patched so many times the cloth looked tired. She held a boy's hand like she was anchoring him to the world. I tipped my hat to her. "We're here," I said. "Step off like you're stepping into your own place." Her face tightened, suspicious in a way only hungry children can be. "We ain't got no place," she said. I nodded like I expected that answer. "Then we start one," I told her. That's when the line began moving. Bare feet on wood, worn boots, bundles tied in cloth, tools scavenged from army camps, an axe with a cracked handle, a hammer missing half its head, one shovel rusted like it had been buried and dug up again. Somebody came carrying a Bible and a rope. And I noticed that too, because men don't bring rope unless they're thinking about building something or ending something. On the shore, a small welcoming party waited like they'd rehearsed being harmless. A Union sergeant with a face like dried mud. A nervous clerk twisting his hat until it looked like he might wring water out of it. And under the shade of a live oak, half in shadow, a man leaning on a cane. That last one is who my eyes went to. He had the posture of somebody who used to give orders. Even with the limp, even with the weight on his stick, you could see an old kind of straightness in his shoulders. Beard trimmed close, hair dark with one stripe of silver like a warning. He stepped forward and called out my name like he'd been waiting to say it. "Commissioner," he said, "you finally made it." "Who are you?" I asked, because I didn't do small talk with men who stand in shade on purpose. He moved into the light. His eyes were pale and patient. The kind of eyes that watch a room the way a gambler watches a deck. "Name S. Ward," he said. I keep what's left of the supplies moving when the army remembers this place exists." He offered his hand, firm grip, no tremor, but his eyes flicked once, just once, to the line of black families stepping off behind me. Not pity, counting, that right there, that's a tell. Men count when they're measuring risk. "You're late," he said, mild as milk. "The war's done," I replied. He smiled without warmth. "War's done on paper," he said. "Out here the dirt hasn't heard." Behind him, somewhere deeper on the island, a roof collapsed with a wet crackle and sent sparks up into the gray sky. That smoke didn't drift like an accident. It drifted like a message. I turned to the people and lifted my voice just enough so it carried. "Everybody to the field," I called. "We talk where all ears can hear." We moved inland, leaving the burning shells of plantation houses behind. Broken chimneys stood like black teeth. The path ran under live oaks dripping with moss that looked like old grief hanging from branches. The ground was damp, springy, hiding roots ready to catch your foot if you walked careless. Past the trees, the island opened into a broad field, grass up to the knee, wild like it had been waiting to belong to somebody new. On one side the marsh stretched forever. Black water cut into thin channels, reeds whispering in the wind like they had their own language. I walked to the center and turned. They formed a rough half-circle around me, faces carved by years, backs marked by work and punishment. Eyes that had seen enough auctions and overseers to distrust any man standing in front of them with authority in his pockets. I raised my hands, palms open. "You know what this place used to be," I said. A low murmur rolled through them, not words, more like agreement shaped into sound. "You bled on it," I continued. "You buried people in it. You fed it with your sweat and didn't get to taste nothing sweet from it." I let that sit, because truth don't need rush. "Now listen," I said. "This island is empty because the old owners ran. They left the keys in the door and the table set like they thought they'd be back for dinner." I reached into my coat and pulled out the government paper, held it up so they could see the seal. "Some folks don't know how to read, but they know what a stamp means. They've been stamped enough. This says the land here is set aside for you," I told them. "Family plots, enough ground to grow and build, enough space to stand without somebody's boot in your shadow." The number mattered. Numbers always matter. People leaned forward like the air itself might carry it better. 40 acres, I said. The phrase snapped through that crowd like electricity. You could feel it, like somebody had struck a match inside their chests. I watched their faces change, not into comfort, into danger, because hope is dangerous. Hope makes men bold. "And listen close," I said. "There are people up the chain who want to take that back. They'll call it law. They'll call it order. They'll say you ain't ready. They'll say you need somebody white to supervise your breathing." I folded the paper and slid it back into my coat. "But I'm telling you what I know," I said. "The law forgets folks like you when it's convenient, and if you wait for it to remember you, you'll die waiting." A man near the front laughed once, short and bitter. "Back scarred like tree roots, the kind of scars that don't fade even if you live long enough to see the world pretend it didn't do it." "You can't promise none of that," he said. I met his eyes and didn't blink. "I can promise I'll put my body between you and whoever comes to chain you again," I told him. "And I can promise this too, nobody is coming to save you. Not Washington, not the army, not some friendly judge." I let that land hard. "The only people who keep you free," I said, "are the ones standing on this island right now." Silence after that, not empty silence, the kind where everybody is hearing their own thoughts for the first time. Then I started laying it out piece by piece like you build a hustle the right way. "Tomorrow we measure," I said. "We mark lines. We give families plots. We pick a council. We pick men to keep the peace. We set rules that match our lives, not theirs. We build a court that won't laugh at your pain. We train guards, not to bully, to protect." The officer in blue shifted beside me like he wanted to interrupt, but he didn't. He could feel it. This crowd was turning into something organized, and that scares men who only understand control. "And hear me," I said softer now. "This won't be a camp. This will be a town, a place with teeth, a place people think twice about touching. That's when I saw it, not full belief, a flicker, imagination. That first spark is always where revolutions start, right before somebody tries to stomp it out. When the crowd began to break up, families moving toward the edge of the field, voices low, people already talking about where to put a garden, where to build a cabin, Ward stepped closer, leaning on his cane like it was part of him. "You talk like a general," he said. I looked at him. "Is that what you came to hear?" I asked. He tilted his head toward the marsh, toward the black water. "They say this place is haunted," he said. "Old stories, soldier stories. A man who ran things out here before this country was even a country. Folks called him the General, too." I followed his gaze. The marsh looked calm, but calm water is where the worst things live. "You believe in ghosts?" I asked. Ward's mouth tightened like he didn't enjoy that question. "I believe defeated men like to blame something besides themselves," he said. "Makes the loss easier to swallow." I studied him, the limp, the steady hands, the careful words. "You sound like a man who's been on the losing side," I said, a pause, small but real. "I wore a different uniform once," Ward replied, and his eyes slid away for half a breath before they returned. "That's over." That told me enough. Men who say that's over like that are trying to convince themselves. I leaned in just slightly, not threatening, just close enough so he understood I heard what he didn't say. "People don't come out of a war and change their name for no reason," I told him. He held my gaze. "People don't get many chances to start again either," he said. The wind shifted, carrying ash over the field. Somewhere behind us, one of the women started humming, low at first, a tune that had once been work song, once been prayer, now turning into something else. Ward watched the families the way a man watches cards being dealt. I kept my voice even. "Council meets tonight," I said. "You say you're here to help, then show up. We can use men who understand how the other side thinks." "And if I'm not here to help?" he asked, still calm. I didn't look away from the marsh. "Then we find out," I said. "This island shows the truth on people. Might take a day, might take a year, but it shows it." That night we gathered in the only big room left standing. An old dining hall gutted by fire and theft, still marked with the scratches of past feasts. The long table had knife gouges and candle wax scars like the wood remembered every lie ever told over it. I rolled up my sleeves and spread paper out. Ink, charcoal, whatever we had. I drew the outline of the island like I was drawing a future, curving shore, open fields, marsh fingers reaching in, high ground, low ground, places you could run, places you'd die. People leaned in close. Some couldn't read a word, but they could recognize a river bend, a stand of trees, a path that led to safety. "This channel," I said, tapping the page, "nobody comes up it without permission." I marked a rise deep in the reeds. "Here," I said, "we put eyes, high enough to see boats early, hidden enough they don't see us at all." An older woman spoke up, voice firm. "We need a burial place," she said. "Good ground, high ground." I nodded and marked it, because if you're building a country, you plan for life and death the same day. A younger man who'd worn a Union jacket not long ago asked, "What kind of court we gonna have?" I didn't smile. I didn't need to. "The kind that looks like us," I said. "Judges who know what a whip sounds like, juries that don't confuse black skin with guilt, and if a white man wants to argue the law, he can stand where you used to stand." You could feel the room tighten. Not fear, something sharper. Ward sat at the far end in the shadow, quiet as a blade, watching everything, saying nothing. When talk turned to training men, night patrols, signals, rules about fires and boats, Ward's attention sharpened, like muscle memory. Somebody pointed to the marsh on my drawing. "Mainland folks call that murder country," one man said. "Say people walk in and don't walk out." I traced the channels with my finger. "The marsh ain't our enemy," I said. "It's our wall, our moat, first soldier that fights for us." I paused, let the ink dry. "But a wall only matters if you know how to use it," I said, "and the men who hate you will test it." Outside, the night pressed against the broken windows. Frogs sang in the wet dark. Wind moved through moss like whispers. I felt it then, That subtle shift that comes before trouble, like a card table going quiet when somebody palms something they shouldn't. Ward cleared his throat behind me. "Commissioner," he said, polite, "you planning for siege?" I didn't turn right away. "I'm planning for men who don't know how to lose," I replied. When I finally looked at him, he was steady, calm, but the cane in his hand wasn't just support, it was an anchor. And I knew anchors can be used two ways, to keep you from drifting, or to keep you from moving when it's time to run. I folded the map carefully and slid it under a stone like it was money. Then I looked around the room, at the people, at the new fire in their eyes, at the fragile thing we were building with ink and nerve. And I understood the truth that always finds you when you start winning. If the enemy can't break the walls from outside, they'll send somebody in. And as the lamps flickered low, I caught Ward's gaze again, just a quick thing like a man checking a door he already unlocked. That's when I knew. The island wasn't just being watched from the mainland. It was being measured from inside the room. 3 months will teach you what a speech can't. First day, people stepped off that boat like their legs didn't trust the ground. By month 3, they walked like the ground owed them room. Cabins rose where slave quarters used to rot. Fields got cleared with hands that had been forced to work, now choosing to work. Kids ran through stumps and tall grass with sticks like rifles, shouting about soldiers and marsh monsters, laughing like the world never owed them pain. But I didn't let the laughter fool me. Every new house is a flag. Every planted row is a claim, and claims bring collectors. I made a habit of walking before dawn, not for romance, not for peace, for numbers, for distance. For the quiet truth people don't notice when the sun is up and the talking starts. Fog like that island. Some mornings it sat so thick you couldn't see your own hands unless you held them close. And fog does two things. It hides you and it hides the man coming for you. That morning it hid both. My boots pressed into damp sand and roots. The island breathed slow. Somewhere in the reeds metal kissed metal. Not loud, not careless. The kind of sound that comes from someone trying not to be heard. Then a whisper right out the fog, "Hold." I stopped without thinking, not fear, habit, survival. A boy stepped out of the mist like the marsh had birthed him, barefoot, mud on his clothes so deep he looked dipped in it, hair cropped close. Face young, but his eyes had already seen the world choose cruelty and call it normal. He had an old rifle in his hands like it belonged there. "North side," he said. "Small boat, 2 white men." I didn't ask how he knew, I knew. We put eyes everywhere, up in trees, on low rises, behind brush. Kids learned fast when the world is hunting their parents. They learned faster when the island depended on it. "How far?" I asked. "Maybe an hour," he said. "Less if they row like they mean it." I looked toward the waterline. Tide was swelling, pushing brackish water into channels, fattening paths that were dry at night and drowning them by noon. The marsh changed its face all day long. That's what made it useful, and what made it deadly. "Wake the militia," I told him. "Quiet. No lamps." He hesitated. "You want 'em to think we sleeping." I nodded once. "Let them feel brave," I said. "Brave men get sloppy." By the time that skiff slid into the reeds, we had 3 men on the shore waiting like they were nobody. No rifles in plain sight. No running. No shouting. One man sat with a pocket knife shaving wood, dropping curls into the water like he had all day. Another leaned on a shovel blade buried like he was planting it. The third, old and bent, sat on a bucket humming like the world never tried to kill him. From the boat, the 2 white men saw exactly what they wanted to see. Soft targets. The first one stepped out with his hood pushed back, pretending daylight made him official. The second wore a pistol like he wanted the island to admire him for it. Boots sank into wet sand. The man with the shovel didn't look up. "Morning," he said like he was greeting a neighbor. The pistol man sneered. "Who runs this place?" The one with the knife kept shaving wood. Calm, slow. "Depends," he said. "Who asking?" "Citizen of Georgia," the pistol man said, "and part of a group you don't want trouble with." The old man chuckled, still seated, still humming under it. "He mean he wear sheets at night," the old man said, "and think that make him somebody." That pistol came up so fast it almost looked like a magic trick, barrel pressed under the old man's chin. "You think you funny," the pistol man said. The old man stopped humming. He looked right into the eyes behind the weapon. No fear. Just a tired patience, like he'd watched men threaten others his whole life and knew most threats were just weak men asking to be taken seriously. "I think you late," the old man said, "and that tide don't wait on fools." The pistol man frowned, confused because he expected pleading, expected scrambling. He didn't understand the shore yet. Behind him, reeds shifted. He turned and saw the boy step out of the marsh with the rifle leveled. Another figure rose behind the tarp in the skiff, blade flashing in a quick, dull line of light, not attacking, just showing presence. The pistol man's mouth opened to reach for a speech he'd rehearsed with his friends. "You're surrounded," he started. Then he stopped because he realized something. There was nobody behind him, no backup, no hidden posse. Just water, and that water was moving. The skiff rocked once and the distance between the boat and shore widened like the marsh had reached out and nudged it. The man with the shovel snapped the handle into the pistol man's wrist. Clean, efficient. The gun flew into sand. The whittler spoke, still calm. "You know where you standing." The pistol man spat, desperate to sound tough. "On my land." The old man shook his head slowly. "See," he said, "that's the sickness. You call everything yours like your mouth is a deed." "It is," the pistol man snapped. The old man nudged the sand with his toe. The ground shifted like it had been waiting for permission. The pistol man's boot sank. He cursed, tried to pull back, but the sand turned liquid under him. Grabbed his ankles, his calves, then his knees. He fought it like fighting would change physics. His partner took one step to help and felt the same tug. Cold water crawled up his boots. The whittler tilted his head, studying them like they were math. "Reach for your boat," he suggested. The skiff drifted just a little farther away, pulled by a current you couldn't see but could definitely feel when it wanted you dead. The boy with the rifle didn't flinch. The pistol man tried to laugh, but it broke halfway. "What you want?" The second man gasped, water already rising to his waist. The whittler answered like he was ordering coffee. "To know who sent you." The pistol man's eyes darted between the boy, the sand, the water, the gun that was now useless like his pride. He swallowed. "The sheriff," he said, and the men you already know." The old man nodded as if he'd been expecting that. "Came to see how we live," the old man said. "Came to count guns, count men." The boy's voice cut in quiet, almost bored. "Now you counted." Water hit the pistol man's chest. Not deep enough to drown, not yet, but the mud tightened around his legs like a fist. His partner's voice cracked. "Pull us out," he begged. "We can go, we can." The rifle clicked, a small sound that told you the world could end right here without any drama. "Maybe," the boy said. The old man stood up slow, joints complaining. He walked close to the edge, careful, because even the people who own a place respect its teeth. He looked down at them like he was looking at a lesson. "Listen," he said. "Not with your ears, with that part of you that knows fear and don't enjoy it." He pointed toward the reeds. "This place don't hate you," he said. "It don't love you either, it just is. You step where you don't belong, it takes you. We live 'cause we learned. You die 'cause you refuse." Then he turned away like it was decided. "Leave 'em," he told the boy. That's when the screaming started. Not brave yelling, real screaming. The kind that strips a man down to whatever he truly is. By the time I got there, the tide had climbed higher, smoothing the surface, covering the trap like the marsh didn't want witnesses. 2 pale faces floated at the edge of the bad patch. 10 fingers clawing at nothing. The old man stood there with his hat in his hands like he was at a funeral. "They came armed," he said, "threatened." I knelt at the water's edge. The pistol man's eyes locked onto mine with pure animal need. "Help me," he rasped. "Please." My voice stayed gentle because power don't need yelling. "You stepped onto this island calling it yours," I said. "You thought the ground would agree." I stood. The old man's voice came soft, offering me a decision instead of challenging it. "We pull 'em out." I looked out toward the mainland, a smear on the horizon where law and hate lived together like brothers. I imagined those two dragging themselves back with a story. I imagined what story they'd tell. I imagined what would come next. Then I looked down again at the water. The marsh had made its choice. I straightened my coat like I was sealing a deal. "Mark that spot," I told the boy. "Put it on the map." He nodded, and the men. The old man asked again, quieter. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, once you let the island start judging, you don't always get to tell it when to stop. That night, under the weak light of a lamp, I sat with the map spread open and drew a circle where those men vanished. I wrote one word beside it, soft. Then I crossed it out, wrote another, justice, crossed that out too. Then I wrote a third word, heavier than the ink, weapon. I stared at it until the flame in the lamp jumped like it was nervous. And that's when I heard the floorboard behind me creak. Not a stumble, not an accident. A slow step, measured. Somebody had been standing in the doorway long enough to watch what I wrote. And when I turned my head, I saw Ward's pale eyes in the lamplight, calm as ever, like he'd just found out exactly what kind of island he'd tied himself to. Ward didn't say anything at first. That's how I knew he was dangerous. Men who rush to talk are trying to control the room. Men who stay quiet are counting exits. He leaned on his cane in the doorway, lamplight cutting his face in half. One side warm, one side cold. That's how some men live, never fully choosing which world they belong to. "Interesting choice of words," he said at last, nodding toward the map. "You naming the marshes moods now." "I'm giving language to reality," I told him, "so the next generation don't have to learn it the hard way." He stepped closer, eyes tracing lines, circles, the careful notes only a planner bothers to make. His gaze lingered on the rise deep in the reeds, the one I'd marked but hadn't explained. "What's stored there?" he asked. "Things we can't afford to lose." He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You build like a man expecting company." "I build like a man who's read the guest list," I replied. He studied me a moment longer, then tapped the map lightly with his cane. "They won't let this stand," he said. "You know that." "I know," I said. "So do you." That was the moment. The quiet understanding between two men who'd both seen how power reacts when it's embarrassed. It doesn't argue, it punishes. The first test came faster than I expected, not with uniforms, with whispers. A fisherman didn't come home one night. A deputy joked too loud in a mainland bar about teaching island folks a lesson and never made it back to his bed. A skiff drifted in at dawn with no one aboard, rope still tied like the hands that fastened it had simply vanished. No bodies, no proof, just absence. The island didn't announce what it did. It let the mainland imagine. And imagination is sharper than any blade. People started arriving after dark. Dugout canoes slipping through channels only locals knew, men with fresh scars, women whose eyes stared straight ahead because looking back meant seeing flames, kids who flinched at footsteps because footsteps had once meant death. I met every one of them at the shore. "Where you from?" I asked. They named places quietly, counties. Towns nobody said out loud anymore. And who did this? At first, they dodged the word like it might reach across the water and grab them. Then a boy, 12 maybe, with blood still crusted under his nails, spat into the sand. The Klan. That's when the map started changing. Not bigger, sharper. Every new arrival brought detail. Patterns, habits, weaknesses. They ride Saturdays, they knock 3 times, they drink before they ride. They don't like crossing water after dark. I listened, I wrote, I remembered. The militia trained harder, patrols doubled. Fires were moved to places that could be killed quick. Children learned signals. Women learned routes. Everybody learned when not to be seen. And then the stories started. The kids whispered them first. Marsh people. They said if you stood at the edge of the reeds long enough, you'd see shapes move low to the ground. Faces smeared with mud. Eyes reflecting moonlight like coals. Adults told them to hush, called it fear talking. But fear has a way of becoming useful. When a white fisherman drifted too close and never came back. When a deputy disappeared after bragging, he'd teach the island to behave. When men in hoods vanished without so much as a splash. No tracks leading out. Only small footprints leading in. I never spoke of the marsh people in council meetings, never named them on the map. But sometimes at dawn, I passed a group of children near the water, clothes damp, eyes too old, and I nodded like they were just playing. Because in a way, they were. They were learning war. The year the vote came changed everything. For the first time, black men could mark paper and have it mean something, could stand for office, could speak in rooms that used to sell them. I went to the mainland and did both. I stood on porches, on crates, behind pulpits, and told white crowds the war was done whether they liked it or not. I told black crowds that walking into a polling place under the eyes of men who wanted you dead was courage in its purest form. I won. The rope came soon after. Not by mail, too polite. They nailed it to the schoolhouse door where children could reach it, a clean loop, neat knot, message underneath in careful handwriting. One general already lost his war. I took it down myself, smiling for the kids. Decoration, I said, for fools. That night I didn't smile. I sat at the council table and let my eyes move slow around the room. They're watching us, I said, from outside and from inside. No one spoke. Even Ward stayed still, hands folded, cane against the table. You suspect someone? He asked. I know how fear works, I said. They won't accept the marsh did this on its own. They'll want names, paths, proof. Ward exhaled slowly. If they've already sent someone in, he said, it means we matter. I looked at him. Fear ain't flattery, I said. It's a countdown. I tapped the map. They'll come with papers first, courts, investigations. When that fails, they'll come with fire. The room felt tighter after that, because everybody knew what fire meant. That same week on the mainland, men started talking loud again. Editors wrote about a black king on the coast. Politicians whispered about order and overreach. And in rooms lit by single lamps, men in plain clothes pressed fingers into stolen maps and traced our island like it was an infection. One of them said it out loud. If we let this live, every dark man thinks he can build a country. Another asked the real question, how we kill it. The answer came easy, find somebody inside. They didn't wait long. They found Ward in a crowded market far from the island, hands full of supplies the army lost. He felt eyes before he saw them, men dressed too neat for dock work, hats pulled low. He ducked into an alley. They followed. You're a long way from home, one of them said. So are you, Ward replied. The man smiled and told Ward his own life like it was a story he'd memorized. His regiment, his father, the plantation, the year he disappeared, the limp. The new name, war ends, the man said. Men choose where to stand. What do you want? Ward asked. Information. They painted it clean. Order, law, safety. They told him he could keep his school, his land, his life. All he had to do was point, show cracks, mark paths. And if I say no, Ward asked. The man smiled wider. Men who say no get lost, he said. Swamps and graves feel the same from the inside. Ward agreed. On the island, I felt the shift before I could prove it. Tools went missing. Conversations stopped when I walked up. A path only 3 scouts knew showed up perfectly drawn in a sheriff's hand 15 miles away. At night, I sat alone with land grants and militia lists, running my fingers over names like I could feel the truth in the ink. That's when the paper arrived. Official, polite. Notice of investigation. I folded it slow. 8 years, I thought. That's how long this place has lived. How many nights of war does it have left? Outside, the marsh breathed. Somewhere in the dark, a child slipped into the water without a sound. And on the mainland, men sharpened pens and knives, believing daylight and signatures made them untouchable. They were wrong, but they were already coming. They came dressed like paperwork. That's how official violence always arrives. Clean collars, calm voices. A belief that ink outranks blood. Gray morning, sky low and undecided. Marsh smelling like rot and rain, and something sharp underneath like metal left too long in water. 3 boats cut across the channel, not skiffs, not fishermen pretending not to see. These were state boats, painted dull government gray, built to carry authority where authority isn't welcome. Men in suits stood at the front, stiff as fence posts. Deputies sat behind them with rifles laid across their knees, fingers resting close like they'd rehearsed touching them. And in the last boat, men with no uniform at all, short hair, scarred hands, the kind that don't need badges because they're already allowed to do what comes next. I watched them through the spyglass from the rise in the marsh. The same hill I'd marked years ago and never explained to anyone who didn't need to know. Around me, nobody spoke. These weren't boys anymore. These were people who had learned patience the hard way. Law first, Josiah murmured. Killers behind. Gun second, I said. Ghosts third. He glanced at me. The ones without badges, I added. They're here to make sure nobody survives the paperwork. The boats scraped against the pier where Hope had first stepped ashore years back. That day, people had arrived hollowed out. Today, the island greeted them thin on purpose. No militia in sight, just a handful of elders, 2 women with babies on their hips, a couple of girls carrying baskets of fish that were more message than meal. At the front of the lead boat, a man with a trimmed beard and a gold watch chain stepped onto the dock like he owned the time itself. I am acting under authority of the state, he announced. We're here to investigate irregularities, land fraud, illegal armed forces. The old man at the shore nodded polite. Long way to row for questions, he said. The island doesn't sit above the law, the man snapped. Where is Commissioner Campbell? The old man tilted his head. In jail, he said. I believe you put him there. The man's jaw tightened. He had been in that courtroom. I remembered his face, remembered how uncomfortable he'd looked when I smiled instead of begged. You can lock a man up, I told them. You can't lock up ground. Standing on the pier now, he smoothed his tone like it could fix what was already wrong. Fine, he said. We'll speak with whoever's in charge. The old man gestured inland, this way. They walked the path through the oaks, through the field, past houses that looked abandoned on purpose. Doors open, tools left where hands last held them. It looked like flight. It was. Inside the council hall, the table waited. So did the map, pinned at the corners with stones, drawn cleaner than anything the state owned. Every creek named, every rise marked, every place that would swallow a careless man shaded just dark enough to matter. The official stepped closer despite himself. He recognized the handwriting. Campbell beside it, written smaller, newer, for those who come after. Behind him, the plainclothes men spread out. Windows, angles, habit. This confirms everything, one assistant whispered. Militia posts, storage areas. Or bait, the official said quietly. They didn't hear him. Outside, deputies fanned out. Orders were given. Rifles lifted. Structures searched. Ward stepped forward then, limping into the light like he belonged there. This man's been our source, one of the scarred men said. Knows every path. I watched from the hill as Ward pointed toward the marsh. They hide what matters where you think nobody can walk, he said. The boats rocked gently in the channel behind them. They followed him, past the burial ground, past the church, into softer ground where reeds brushed knees and the air thickened with water and iron. Watch your step, Ward said. Some places don't let go. They laughed. Men always laugh right before the ground decides who they are. They reached the rise, brush kicked aside, oilcloth peeled back, rifles, a lot of them, enough to justify anything. Guard this, the official ordered. Catalog it, move it to the boats. That's when the bell rang. Low, distant, almost mistaken for wind. Josiah glanced at me. Now. I shook my head. Let them feel finished, I said. Then it began, not like war, like accidents, a rope slipping, a boat drifting out of reach, a lantern knocked just right, fire racing along reeds soaked days ago, a watchtower collapsing when 2 men climbed at once. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Confidence died first. Smoke curled where exits used to be. Fire traced a circle not toward homes but around them. They're burning their own land, someone shouted. Ward watched the line of flame. No, he said, they're burning your way out. Nets fell, pits opened. Mud took men to the waist while vines wrapped rifles and arms like hands that knew anatomy. Gunshots cracked, slow, careful, not meant to kill quick, Meant to teach, you are not safe, you are not in control, you are not God. On the hill water rose, the channel they crossed doubled in width, the tide turned. We need to retreat, the official said, voice cracking at the edges. Ward stared at the water. You can try, he said, but it won't be where you left it. From the reeds came the sound. Not words, not song, a low call, old, coordinated. The men without uniforms stiffened. What is that? Someone whispered. Ward swallowed. The children, he said, and everything they learned. Shapes moved in the fog. Low, quiet, eyes catching light. The scarred man raised his rifle. Ward shoved it up just as it fired uselessly into the sky. Don't, Ward said. You shoot at them, the island answers. Below, a deputy ran toward what he thought were civilians. He never reached them. A smaller body hit his legs. Hands moved fast. Rifle gone, breath knocked out. He lay staring up at a child with mud on his face and lines drawn in his head. Don't, the child said. The fire crept closer. By the time the smoke thinned, a third of the men who came would never leave, some taken by mud, some by bullets that spoke only once, some by paths that rearranged themselves. The rest ran. Near the hill, a small flat boat slid out of the reeds. Children stood in it, poles steady. One girl looked at Ward. We came for you, she said. The official clutched the map tighter. You're letting him go, he demanded. Ward didn't look at him. I'm done choosing wrong, he said. He stepped where she stepped. The plank held. Behind him, the island burned exactly what it needed to burn. And in a cell miles away, I sat on my bunk and counted boats in my head. 3. I smiled just enough. Because 3 boats meant arrogance, and arrogance never survives the marsh. By sundown, the mainland was already writing the lie. Ink dries faster than blood. They called it a restoration. Said the state reasserted control. Said illegal arms were seized. Said order had been returned to a lawless place. They didn't list the names of the men who didn't come back. They never do. The gray boats limped away lighter than they arrived. Fewer boots on deck. More silence. The ones who survived didn't look victorious. They stared at the water like it might reach up and finish the conversation. On the island, the fires burned out exactly where they were meant to. No houses touched that needed to stand. No fields ruined that needed planting. Smoke thinned and lifted like a curtain closing. That night nobody celebrated. Victory is loud. Survival is quiet. The children washed the mud from their faces in the marsh, careful not to waste water. The women counted heads twice. The men repaired what was meant to be broken and left what was meant to warn. The island exhaled. Across the channel, Ward didn't speak as the small boat carried him through paths only children knew. He stepped careful, cane testing each plank before his weight followed. For the first time in years, he wasn't leading men into danger. He was being led. The girl at the front didn't turn around. You'll answer, she said. Not to us, to him. Ward knew who she meant, me. In my cell, I felt the shift before the guard spoke. Power always changes the air first. The door clanged open. Keys rattled. A man stood there trying not to look shaken. Your island burned, he said like it was an insult. How many boats? I asked. He hesitated. 2 came back, he said. 1 didn't. I nodded. That was enough. They released me weeks later, quietly. No apology, no explanation. That's how governments admit mistakes. They pretend nothing happened. When I stepped back onto the island, the ground felt the same. That mattered. The people gathered without being called. No speeches, no cheering, just nods, familiar weight, shared understanding. Ward stood apart, thinner now, older in the eyes. He leaned on his cane like it was heavier than before. You should have killed me, he said. No, I replied. You should have to live knowing which side you chose. He swallowed. They'll come again, he said. Different way, courts, deeds, taxes, slow strangulation. I know, I said. That's how power prefers it. I walked to the table where the map lay, still pinned, edges worn now. I traced the circles, the channels, the crosses, soft, justice, weapon, all crossed out. I added nothing because the map was finished. The island had learned, and so had the men who feared it. But fear doesn't disappear. It waits. It adapts. It sends better liars next time. As night settled in and the marsh began to breathe again, I looked out toward the mainland and felt the truth settle heavy and calm in my chest. This wasn't the end. It was proof. And proof is the most dangerous thing you can give people who already believe they own the world. Somewhere out there, someone was already planning the next move. And this time they wouldn't come with boats. They stopped coming in boats. That's how I knew the lesson stuck. Men who survive the marsh don't forget it. They talk about it in low voices. They tell it crooked, trimming off the parts that make them look weak. But the fear stays intact. Fear always survives the edits. What came next wore cleaner shoes, taxes, deeds, surveys, letters folded neat and polite like apologies that don't mean anything. The state learned what guns couldn't do and decided to starve the island instead. Paper cuts, slow pressure, quiet suffocation. That's the long game. And I've always respected a man who plays the long game, especially when he thinks nobody else sees the board. I sat at the table most nights, lamp low, rereading documents like they were faces. Who signed? Who didn't? Who delayed? Who rushed? Delays tell you more than threats ever will. Ward sat across from me sometimes, silent, hands folded. A man who had crossed a line and didn't know yet if the ground on this side would hold him forever. "They're squeezing," he said one night. "Supply permits, transport fees, school funding." "They're counting," I replied, "seeing who gets hungry first. And if it works." I looked up at him. "Then they won't need fire," I said. "They'll let us burn ourselves." That's when I noticed it. Not a theft, not a rumor, a pause, a shipment that should have arrived didn't, a messenger who came back with answers that were too smooth, a council vote that went the wrong way by one hand. One hand is all it takes. I didn't accuse anyone. Accusations make men defensive. Defensive men get sloppy only after they do damage. Instead, I waited, because betrayal hates patience. The children still trained at the edge of the marsh, older now, quieter. They didn't play war anymore. They studied it, roots. Timing, how long it takes sound to carry over water at night. I told them less. They already knew enough. One evening just before dusk, a boy came to me without being called. Not running, walking. That mattered. "There's a man asking questions," he said. "Not loud ones." "Where?" "By the South Channel. He knows names." I nodded. Names are currency. That night I walked the island again before dawn. Same habit, same reasons. The fog welcomed me like it always had. At the edge of the marsh I saw a lantern blink once, then twice. Wrong signal. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. I already knew what it meant. Someone was testing whether the island still watched itself. Back at the table I pulled the map toward me. Old paper now, soft at the folds, heavy with memory. I didn't add a mark. I erased one, a small one, easy to miss. The kind of change only someone who relied on it would notice. Then I waited, because the next move wouldn't come with papers or boats. It would come with confidence. And confidence, sooner or later, always steps where the ground looks solid and isn't. Somewhere beyond the water, a man was already rehearsing a story where this island finally broke. He just didn't know yet that the island was listening and counting. Confidence arrived wearing a friendly face. That's the most dangerous kind. He came alone. No badge, no rifle on display. Shoes clean enough to tell you he didn't plan on stepping anywhere soft. He walked the South Channel like a man who'd been told it was safe, like a man who believed the map in his pocket still matched the ground. That told me everything. Men who scout don't walk alone. Men who negotiate don't risk their shoes. This one believed the island had gone quiet. I let him reach the clearing before anyone spoke to him. Let him feel the silence stretch. Let his confidence warm him up good before the cold set in. "You the one they call commissioner?" He asked, smiling like we were about to do business. "I answer to the island," I said. "Depends what you're selling." He chuckled easy. "Peace," he said. "Stability, a future where everybody eats." That word again, everybody, always means somebody else decides who goes hungry first. "I hear you got trouble," he went on. "Courts breathing down your neck, funds drying up, folks getting restless." I watched his eyes. They kept drifting to the paths, the exits, old habits. "People like you," he said, lowering his voice. "You build something impressive, but you don't know when to stop protecting it." There it was, the pitch. States willing to help, he said. If you help us, a little restructuring, new leadership, you step back, let cooler heads manage things. I smiled just enough. Cooler heads don't come alone, I said. His smile flickered. Half a second, that's all betrayal ever gives you. I don't need muscle, he said. The island's tired. Behind him a bird lifted from the reeds, not spooked, signaled. I stepped closer, close enough he could smell the marsh on me. You're standing on ground that remembers everything, I told him. Every lie, every footprint. He swallowed. I think you misunderstand, he said. This is happening with or without you. That's where you're wrong, I replied. Everything that happens here asks permission first. The ground shifted, just a little, not enough to take him, enough to make him feel it. His eyes widened. He tried to step back and realized the path he came in on didn't feel the same anymore. Who are you really? He asked. I leaned in. I'm the man who waits, I said, and you just walked into the part of the story where waiting ends. From the fog I heard feet, soft, controlled, more than one. The man opened his mouth to shout. Nothing came out because he finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an audit, and the island was about to balance its books. The fog closed in, and somewhere beneath our feet the ground decided who stayed and who became a warning. He tried to run. They always do once the ground stops feeling honest. His first step went nowhere, not stuck, not trapped, just wrong. Like the island had shifted a half-inch to the left while his body still believed yesterday's map. Easy, he said, hands up now, voice cracking just enough to betray the math breaking in his head. No need for this. That's when I knew who sent him. Men who say no need for this never come from the top. They come from the layer underneath. The layer that thinks it can clean things up quietly and still get credit. Who told you the South Channel was safe? I asked. He didn't answer. I nodded once. That was answer enough. The fog thickened, not by accident. It rolled in low, damp familiar. The kind that carries sound away from where it starts. The kind mothers on the island had learned to read like weather on skin. Shapes moved at the edge of it, not rushing. No panic, patience learned young. You don't have to disappear, the man said quickly. I can go back, tell them it's not worth it. Worth what? I asked. Control. His mouth opened, then closed. That hesitation was expensive. You already told them something, I said. Otherwise you wouldn't be here alone. His shoulders sagged just a fraction. Enough. Names, he said. Roots, how food comes in, who's tired, who's scared. There it was, the real currency. Behind him the ground gave another quiet warning. Not swallowing, just reminding. You sold hope like it was surplus, I said. That's a debt you don't get to walk away from. I was told you'd listen, he said, that you were reasonable. I almost laughed. I listened very well, I said. That's why you're standing where you are. A sound drifted through the fog. Not a voice, a signal, the kind you don't mistake once you've heard it enough times. The man turned too fast, bad idea. His foot slid. The marsh reached up, curious now. Wait, he said, please. I crouched so we were eye level, calm, close. You'll walk back, I told him. Slow, you'll tell them exactly what you saw, what you felt. You'll tell them the island isn't loud, it's patient. His breathing shook. And if they don't listen, he whispered. I stood. Then next time, I said, I won't send a message. Hands appeared from the fog, gentle, precise. They guided him, not dragging, not harming, just correcting his steps where the ground allowed it. He was escorted to the edge of the channel, set down where the path was still honest. Before he left, he looked back once. I didn't wave. I don't do farewells with men like that. As the fog lifted with the coming light, the island returned to its quiet work. Nets checked. Fires banked. Children sent to lessons like nothing unusual had happened. That's how you keep something alive. You don't announce it. You maintain it. I walked back to the table as the day found its shape. The map waited. No new marks. No changes. Because the most dangerous maps are the ones that look finished. Out there, across the water, someone was already deciding whether to believe the man who came back shaken and empty-handed. And if they decided not to, the island would be ready, because the next move wouldn't be confidence, it would be desperation, and desperation never knocks. Desperation came quiet, no speeches, no messengers, no smiling men pretending to sell peace, just absence. Boats that stopped coming near the island altogether, trade routes that bent wide like the water was cursed, officials who suddenly forgot our names when letters were sent. That's how power sulks when it loses a round. It pretends you don't exist and waits for hunger to do the work. I let it wait. We rationed without announcing it. Shifted planting schedules. Moved storage deeper into places only memory could find. Nothing flashy, nothing proud. Survival is a discipline, not a celebration. Ward watched all of it, quieter than ever. Guilt has a sound, it's the scrape of a chair that doesn't need moving. The pause before a sentence that never comes. "They're not done," he said one night like it was a confession. "No," I agreed. "They're just done rushing." That's when the mainland made its real move. Not through us, through time. A new law, buried in fine print, reclassification of land, retroactive language, old deeds resurrected like ghosts dragged into daylight. The kind of law written so slow it feels inevitable by the time you notice it. On paper, the island belonged to nobody again. On paper, nobody like us ever did. I read it twice, then a third time for the spaces between words. That's where the knife lives. "They'll send surveyors next," Ward said, "then courts, then sheriffs." "And if that don't work?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night the fog came back heavier than I'd seen it in years. It rolled in like it had been called. The marsh breathed deeper, louder, like it knew something was being asked of it. A child came to my door just before dawn. No fear, no rush. "They're measuring," she said, "not the land." I felt that settle. "What are they measuring?" I asked. "How long before we break?" she replied. I stepped outside. The island was still, too still. Even the frogs held their tongues. That's when I understood. The next men wouldn't come to fight us. They'd come to replace us. New faces, black faces, bought ones. Men willing to wear titles and sell the ground out from under their own feet if it meant a seat at someone else's table. That kind of enemy doesn't wear sheets or badges. That kind smiles. I went back to the table and unfolded the map one last time. Not to add, not to erase, just to remember. Because whatever came next wouldn't be decided by ink or law or fire. It would be decided by loyalty. And loyalty is the only thing the marsh can't test for you. Somewhere beyond the water, someone was already choosing who to buy. And on the island, the ground waited to see who would be foolish enough to sell it. Betrayal never kicks the door in. It pulls up a chair. The first sign wasn't violence. It was manners. Meetings ran longer. Voices got softer. People started saying maybe where they used to say no. A few men stopped looking me in the eye, not because they were scared, because they were rehearsing something. You can feel that kind of shift if you're quiet enough. It's like a card game where somebody's stacking chips behind their sleeve and smiling too hard while they do it. I didn't stop it, I watched. Because when loyalty breaks, you don't patch it with speeches. You let it reveal who it belongs to. The new faces came with paperwork and promises, titles that sounded important. Trustees, administrators, black men from the mainland, clean coats, careful words. They talked about sustainability, about compromise, about how the island needed to join the future. That word again, future. It's always spoken by people who don't plan to live in it. One of them stood up during council and cleared his throat like he was about to bless the room. "We can't keep acting like this place is a fortress," he said. "The state's offering recognition, funding, protection." "Protection from who?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "That's the point," he said finally. "So there won't be anyone to protect ourselves from." A few heads nodded. That hurt more than any rope ever could. After the meeting, a woman who'd buried 2 sons on that island stood beside me. "They scared," she said quietly. "Scared people trade anything." "I know," I told her. That night I changed nothing. No patrols doubled, no speeches made, no warnings whispered. Instead, I invited everyone to walk the island at dawn. Every channel, every path. every place where the ground turned treacherous without apology. We walked slow, together, old folks, children, the new men too, stiff in their shoes, trying not to show discomfort when the mud reached up to test them. At the bad places, I stopped. "This ground," I said, "don't care what paper you carry. It don't care who promised you safety. You step wrong, it takes you." One of the new men laughed nervously. "You threatening us?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm reminding you," I said. "Threats come from men, warnings come from land." When we reached the rise in the marsh, the one I never named out loud, I let them see it clear in daylight. Storage opened. Supplies counted. Enough to survive a season without permission. Eyes widened. Calculations started. That's when I knew who was already lost. Later that day, a boy came to me, voice low. "They met without you," he said, "by the South Channel." I nodded. Of course they did. That meeting wasn't about overthrowing me. It was about deciding whether I was already gone. As night settled, I sat alone at the table, lamp low, listening to the island breathe. Somewhere out there, someone I trusted was convincing himself he was doing the right thing. That's the most dangerous man of all, because when he moves, he won't think of it as betrayal. He'll think of it as progress. And progress, when it's pointed the wrong way, kills faster than hate ever could. The island knew it too. The water shifted. The fog rolled in. And for the first time in a long while, the ground waited, not for outsiders, but for one of its own to step wrong. The meeting by the South Channel didn't last long. That told me more than any spy ever could. Long meetings mean doubt. Short meetings mean decisions already made. I didn't send anyone to listen. I didn't need names yet. Names come later when they can't hide behind each other. What I needed was timing. Timing is where betrayals slip. Just before midnight, the fog thickened again. Not sudden, not dramatic. It rolled in the way an old habit returns, quiet, familiar, almost comforting. That's when the island started talking, not in words, in movement. A boat untied itself and drifted 10 yards farther than it should have. A lantern went out where it never did. Footsteps crossed a path that hadn't been used since before the war. Someone was walking like the ground still owed him loyalty. I stood at the edge of the field and waited. Power doesn't chase. Power lets mistakes arrive on schedule. A shape emerged through the fog, careful but not careful enough. A man I knew well. A man who'd eaten at my table. Who de-argued law and faith in the same breath. Who'd sworn he wanted the island to survive. He froze when he saw me. Didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't run. That told me everything. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, forcing calm. "You shouldn't be out here at all," I replied. He swallowed. "They're coming at dawn," he said. "Surveyors, deputies, papers signed already." "And you?" I asked. He looked away. "I told them where the safe paths were," he said. "Just the ones they'd use first." The fog shifted behind him. The marsh listened. "You told them where they thought it was safe," I said. His head snapped up. "What does that mean?" I stepped closer, slow enough not to spook him. "It means you still don't understand this place," I said. "You just understand maps." A sound came from the reeds, soft, almost respectful. He heard it too. "You said you wouldn't turn it on us," he whispered. "I didn't," I said. "You did." His foot slid back half an inch. That's all it takes. The ground gave a warning tremor, the kind the island offers once if it's feeling merciful. He looked at me, panic breaking through the logic he'd been feeding himself. "Please," he said. "I was trying to save it." I held his gaze, voice even. "No," I said. "You were trying to survive it." Behind him, the fog thickened until the channel disappeared completely. And far out beyond the water, somewhere on the mainland, men were already waking up, believing dawn would belong to them. They didn't know yet that the island had already decided who would greet it. And who wouldn't. I didn't push him. That's the part people get wrong when they tell these stories later. They imagine shouting. Hands. A final shove. The island doesn't need help. He took another step back on his own. Not running. Not yet. Just shifting his weight like a man who thinks balance is still an option. The marsh answered by loosening the ground beneath his heel. Not enough to take him. Enough to tell him the truth. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he said, voice cracking now, the mask finally slipping. "It never is," I replied. That's how you know it's real." He looked past me into the fog, searching for something familiar, a landmark, a rule, a mercy written down somewhere he could point to. There wasn't one. "I can fix it," he said quickly. "I can go back, change what I told them." "You already did change it," I said, "just not in the direction you thought." Another sound moved through the reeds, soft feet, controlled breathing, the presence of people who didn't need to be announced. His eyes widened. "You brought children into this," he said, horrified. "I didn't raise my voice." "No," I said. "The world did. We just taught them how to survive it." What? A hand touched his shoulder from behind. Not rough, certain. He flinched anyway. "What happens to me?" he asked. I looked at the fog, at the water slowly claiming space the way it always does when night turns toward morning. "That depends," I said, "on whether you listen for once." They guided him, not dragging, not hurting, toward the edge of a channel that still held, for now, somewhere he could sit and think while the tide decided what came next. I stayed where I was until the fog thinned just enough to show the horizon beginning to pale. Dawn was coming, so were the surveyors, the deputies, the men with clean boots and confident papers. They believed morning meant control. They believed betrayal had softened us. They believed the island was tired. I walked back toward the table as the first light reached the marsh. The map waited unchanged because the real adjustments were already happening out there, in water levels, in patience, in fear quietly changing sides. By the time the first boat touched the channel at dawn, the island would look calm, too calm. And calm right before daylight is how a place tells you it's ready. Dawn didn't arrive loud. It crept in careful, like it knew where it was stepping. The fog thinned just enough to make liars confident. That's the trick of morning. It makes men believe whatever survived the night must be safe. The boats came slow. Surveyors up front, coats pressed, notebooks tucked tight. Deputies behind them, rifles angled down but ready. No killers this time. No shadows. Just men who believed the law walked ahead of them like a shield. They stepped onto the pier and waited for resistance. None came. No militia, no crowd. No shouting commissioner with fire in his eyes, just quiet. One of the surveyors cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Proceed," he said, because silence makes weak men crave orders. They followed the familiar path inland. Oaks, field, council house. Everything exactly where the map said it would be. That's when doubt started scratching. The field was empty but not abandoned, tools stacked neat. Rows measured, crops tended, not chaos, preparation. Inside the hall the table waited, so did the map. Same stones, same lines, same handwriting. One surveyor leaned over it too fast. "Sir," he said, "this is remarkably detailed." Another frowned. "These marsh markings don't match our charts." The deputy captain glanced around the room. "Where's Campbell?" he asked. No answer. Outside a bell rang, not the warning bell, the other one, low, far, meant for people who already knew what it meant. The tide turned, not dramatic, just enough to change assumptions. One deputy stepped off the path to relieve himself and felt the ground give an inch too easily. He froze, heart jumping ahead of his body. "Captain," he called, too late. The marsh didn't grab him. It invited him. Men rushed to help and stopped themselves just in time. Training fought instinct. Fear fought pride. Across the field, smoke rose not from fire but from damp reeds releasing mist as water filled channels that hadn't existed yesterday. Paths closed. New ones opened. The map on the table was still accurate, just not for them. From the edge of the trees, figures appeared. Not charging, not hiding. Standing where the ground was solid because they'd chosen it years ago. Women, men, older children, no uniforms, no flags, just presence. The deputy captain raised his voice. "This is an illegal obstruction of state business." No one answered. I stepped out last, slow, unhurried, coat buttoned like this was an appointment. "You're late," I said. He turned, startled. "You're under arrest," he snapped, reaching for authority like it was a weapon. I smiled gently. "You can try," I said, "but you're standing in the wrong courtroom." The ground shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. The surveyors backed away from the marsh edge, notebooks forgotten. "Captain," one whispered, "we should withdraw." He hesitated. That hesitation cost him, not his life, his certainty. I raised my voice just enough. You came to measure land, I said, but you never measured the people who learned how to hold it. Silence stretched. The island waited. Finally, the captain nodded once stiff. Return to boats, he ordered. No panic, no running, just retreat. They left without a single shot fired, without a single arrest made. By noon, the water had erased their footprints. That night I sat at the table and folded the map. Not because the fight was over, because the lesson was complete. The island didn't belong to paper. It belonged to those who stayed when staying was dangerous. And somewhere beyond the marsh, men were already telling each other a new story. One where the island wasn't conquered. One where it simply refused. Refusal travels faster than violence. By the third week, nobody said the island's name out loud on the mainland anymore. They pointed at maps, lowered voices, used phrases like "that place and not worth the trouble." That's not peace. That's a pause, and pauses are where smarter enemies breathe. I felt it in the letters that stopped coming. In the judges who suddenly postponed hearings without explanation. In the way supply prices rose for everyone connected to us, like punishment that didn't need to explain itself. They weren't attacking the island anymore. They were isolating it. Starve the roots. Let the tree fall on its own. One night Ward sat across from me longer than usual, didn't speak, just stared at the map like he was memorizing it for when it was gone. "They'll wait you out," he said finally. "You know that." "I've been waited out before," I replied. "Doesn't end the way they think." He hesitated. "There's talk," he said, "not official, quiet, about removing you from the equation." I looked up. "Prison again?" I asked. "Worse," he said. "An accident, travel, illness, something clean." I nodded slowly. That was honest information, dangerous information. "Who's talking?" I asked. Ward didn't answer. That answer mattered more than any name. Outside, the island moved in its sleep, water shifting, wood creaking. A place alive enough to defend itself, but not immortal. I folded the map and slid it into the drawer. "Then it's time," I said. "For what?" Ward asked. "For the thing they don't plan for," I replied. "What happens when the man they're watching stops being the center?" He frowned. "You stepping away?" "No," I said. "I'm stepping sideways." That same night I walked the island one last time before dawn. Same route, same counting, same listening. At the edge of the marsh a child waited, older now, taller, eyes steady. "They're watching the channel," she said, "from far off." "I know," I replied. She tilted her head. "They won't see you leave." I looked at her. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm multiplying." By sunrise the island looked unchanged, but the work had already moved, quietly, deliberately. Because power that survives learns one final lesson. You don't protect a place by standing in front of it forever. You protect it by making sure it doesn't fall when you're gone. And somewhere out there, men were already congratulating themselves, believing the problem had a single name. They were about to find out how expensive that mistake really was. They thought I was the lock. That was their mistake. Locks get picked, broken, removed clean and replaced with something friendlier. That's how men in offices solve problems. What they never account for is a house that doesn't need a door. I stopped being visible, not gone, not hiding, just no longer standing where they expected me to stand. Meetings went on without my chair filled. Decisions got made by councils instead of voices. Routes changed without announcement. Supplies moved on schedules that weren't written down anywhere. The island didn't slow. It learned how to breathe without me at the center of its lungs. That's when the pressure increased. A judge from the mainland died in his sleep. Natural causes, they said. The very next week, a writ surfaced with my name on it, already half forgotten, already softened by distance. Another man tried to claim authority over island matters and found nobody answered his questions in the same order twice. They were grabbing at smoke. Ward came to me one evening with a face that had finally chosen a side. "They're done waiting," he said. "They're going to make an example." "Of who?" I asked. He didn't say my name. He said the islands. That's when I knew the next move wouldn't be legal or secret. it would be loud. I stood at the edge of the marsh at dusk and watched the water shift colors as the light faded. This place had swallowed men who came with hatred. It had humbled men who came with certainty. Now it was about to meet something else. Men who came with nothing left to lose. Those are the most dangerous kind. Behind me, children practiced signals without speaking. Women checked stores without counting out loud. Men tested paths with their feet, not their eyes. Nobody asked what was coming. They could feel it. I turned back toward the island and spoke once, low enough that only those meant to hear it did. "Whatever happens next," I said, "remember this. We don't survive because we're hidden. We survive because we're connected." Far out on the water, a light flickered where no light should be. Not a boat, a signal. Someone somewhere had finally decided to stop pretending, and the island, patient as ever, leaned forward to see who would step first. The signal came back wrong. That's how I knew it wasn't ours. 2 blinks instead of 3. Held a second too long. The kind of mistake you only make if you learn the pattern from a man who learned it from another man who never walked the marsh at night. They were close now. Close enough to believe that mattered. I didn't order anyone to move. Orders get overheard. Instead, I let the island do what it had learned to do without me speaking. Paths shifted. Fires went dark. Boats loosened their ties just enough to drift but not leave. The water rose in places it shouldn't have, quiet as breath. Ward stood beside me, staring at the distant light. "They're bringing numbers," he said, "more than before." "They always do when they're scared," I replied. "Fear makes men think volume is strategy." He hesitated. "And if this time they don't care about bodies?" I looked at him. "Then this time," I said, "they'll lose something they can't bury." The first boat grounded wrong, too far left, scraped wood where water should have been deep. I heard the sound carry across the marsh like a question. No response. The second boat followed the first mistake. That's when the shouting started. Not orders, confusion. Men arguing with maps. Maps arguing with reality. I stepped forward just enough to be seen when the fog thinned. Not to threaten, to anchor their attention. "There's still time to turn back," I called, calm, even. "You don't want what comes next." A voice shouted back, angry, desperate. "We're done talking." I nodded. That's usually when listening should have started. The ground answered before I did. Not swallowing, not yet, just changing the math. Water cutting off angles, mud stealing speed. Sound carrying wrong so every step felt watched. They fired once. Wild, useless. The echo came back to them distorted like the island laughing without sound. From the edges, figures moved, not rushing, guiding, pressing without touching. Making men choose between bad ground and worse ground. That's the secret. You don't defeat an enemy by attacking him. You let him defeat himself faster. One man broke and ran, straight into water that looked shallow and wasn't. He vanished with a sound like surprise being taken away. The others froze, panic rippled, orders collapsed. I watched it all with the same calm I'd had the first day I stepped onto this land. Because by now I wasn't defending the island. I was witnessing it. And as the fog closed in again, thicker than before, I understood the last truth power never learns until it's too late. You can conquer people. You can conquer land. But when people and land decide to belong to each other, you don't win, you withdraw, or you disappear. And out there in the dark, men were making that choice one terrified step at a time. By the time the sun thought about rising, the water had already made its decision. What was left of their numbers stood scattered, breathing hard, boots heavy with mud, rifles useless because nobody knew which direction mattered anymore. Fog wrapped them close, not hiding us, isolating them from each other. That's worse. Isolation breaks men faster than fear. A voice called out, trying to sound like command. "Hold your ground." Nobody listened. Ground only means something when it agrees with you. I walked forward where they could see me clear now. No rush, no weapon raised, just a man who knew exactly where his feet belonged. "This ends now," I said. "Either you leave with what you came in with, or you leave lighter." A deputy dropped his rifle. Not dramatic, just tired. Another followed. The sound of metal hitting mud carried far. The rest understood. They backed away slow, guided by hands they couldn't see, by paths that reopened just long enough to let regret pass through. No pursuit, no final shots. The island doesn't chase what's already learned. By full daylight, the marsh looked empty again. No bodies on display, no trophies, just disturbed water settling back into its old shape like it always does after swallowing a secret. That's how you keep something alive. You don't let it become a story men can study. You let it become a place they avoid. Word traveled after that, not official, not printed. It moved the way warnings always move, from mouth to ear, from men who wouldn't look you in the eye when they spoke. They said the island was wrong. They said maps lied there. They said people went inshore and came out changed if they came out at all. They stopped sending men. They stopped sending papers. They stopped pretending. Years passed the way they always do, quiet on the surface, busy underneath. Children grew up knowing where to step. Councils argued and solved problems without waiting for permission. The island didn't expand. It endured. Wards stayed, never fully forgiven, never fully cast out. Some debts don't get settled clean. They just get carried. As for me, I faded the way I intended. Not erased, distributed in habits, in rules, in the calm way people handled danger without asking for instructions. That's real power. Not being remembered as a name, but as a method. Some nights when the fog rolls in just right, you can still feel it, that quiet pressure, that sense that the ground is listening. And if you're smart, you listen back. Because the island is still there, waiting, and it always knows who belongs. And who's about to make their last mistake. They buried it clean. That was the smartest thing they did. No trials, no headlines, no dramatic reckoning that might invite questions, just quiet adjustments, deeds reassigned on paper, jurisdictions redrawn with careful language, committees formed then forgotten. The kind of burial that leaves no grave to point at. On the mainland, men spoke of the island in past tense like it was a phase that ran its course, a mistake corrected, an experiment that collapsed under its own weight. That lie traveled far. It reached cities, universities, courtrooms. It settled into books where footnotes went thin and convenient, but lies like that only work if the place itself agrees. The island never did. Trade resumed sideways, boats that weren't listed, routes that weren't recorded, people who arrived knowing better than to ask who owned what. Councils changed faces, not purpose. Rules shifted, not principles. No flags, no declarations, just continuity. I watched it from farther back now, the way you watch a thing you've already taught to stand. Not absent, just unnecessary. That's when the visitors came again. Not soldiers, not officials, observers. Men with notebooks, clean hands, curious eyes. They came under the excuse of history, of scholarship, of understanding. They asked polite questions and listened too carefully to the answers. What really happened out here? One of them asked an elder one afternoon, pen hovering like it wanted permission. The elder smiled. "Depends who you ask," she said. They wrote that down like it meant nothing. At night the fog rolled in the same as ever. Children, grown now, walked paths their feet knew better than their eyes. The marsh kept its own records. Water remembers pressure. Land remembers weight. And sometimes, just sometimes, a visitor would step wrong. Nothing dramatic, just enough to send them back home quiet. That's how places survive power, not by defeating it outright, by teaching it caution. By the time anyone thought to look for me officially, there was no one place to point. No single man to accuse or remove. I'd already done what I came to do. The island no longer needed a general. It had generals everywhere. And somewhere out there in offices far from water, men were still congratulating themselves on how neatly the problem had ended. They didn't realize they were living inside the aftermath. They still tell the story wrong. They say the island calmed down. They say order returned. They say nothing important lasted. That's how people protect themselves from the truth, by shrinking it until it fits their comfort. But power doesn't disappear. It changes posture. The island never announced what it became. It didn't raise monuments or carve names into stone. It kept doing what it had learned, teaching its children where to stand, teaching its elders when to speak, teaching strangers how to leave. Years later, men who never met me still hesitated before crossing that water. They couldn't explain why, just a feeling, a pressure in the chest, the sense that something unseen was watching how they moved. That's legacy, not a statue, not a chapter in a book, a rule that doesn't need enforcing. I faded completely after that. No reports, no sightings worth printing. To the world, I became a rumor with too much confidence attached to it. But to the island, I was never a man anyway. I was a method. When the fog rolls in thick and the tide turns quiet, you can still feel it. The understanding that some places don't belong to whoever shows up with paper and certainty. They belong to whoever learned the ground well enough to survive it. That lesson doesn't age. It waits. And for anyone thinking about trying again, thinking the time has finally passed, thinking fear forgets. The island is still there, so is the ground, and it's still listening. They still tell the story wrong. They say the island calmed down. They say order returned. They say nothing important lasted. That's how people protect themselves from the truth, by shrinking it until it fits their comfort. But power doesn't disappear. It changes posture. The island never announced what it became. It didn't raise monuments or carve names into stone. It kept doing what it had learned, teaching its children where to stand, teaching its elders when to speak, teaching strangers how to leave. Years later, men who never met me still hesitated before crossing that water. They couldn't explain why, just a feeling, a pressure in the chest, the sense that something unseen was watching how they moved. That's legacy, not a statue, not a chapter in a book, a rule that doesn't need enforcing. I faded completely after that. No reports, no sightings worth printing. To the world, I became a rumor with too much confidence attached to it. But to the island, I was never a man anyway. I was a method. When the fog rolls in thick and the tide turns quiet, you can still feel it. The understanding that some places don't belong to whoever shows up with paper and certainty. They belong to whoever learned the ground well enough to survive it. That lesson doesn't age. It waits. And for anyone thinking about trying again, thinking the time has finally passed, thinking fear forgets. The island is still there, so is the ground, and it's still listening. They still tell the story wrong. They say the island calmed down. They say order returned. They say nothing important lasted. That's how people protect themselves from the truth, by shrinking it until it fits their comfort. But power doesn't disappear. It changes posture. The island never announced what it became. It didn't raise monuments or carve names into stone. It kept doing what it had learned, teaching its children where to stand, teaching its elders when to speak, teaching strangers how to leave. Years later, men who never met me still hesitated before crossing that water. They couldn't explain why, just a feeling, a pressure in the chest, the sense that something unseen was watching how they moved. That's legacy, not a statue, not a chapter in a book, a rule that doesn't need enforcing. I faded completely after that. No reports, no sightings worth printing. To the world, I became a rumor with too much confidence attached to it. But to the island, I was never a man anyway. I was a method. When the fog rolls in thick and the tide turns quiet, you can still feel it. The understanding that some places don't belong to whoever shows up with paper and certainty. They belong to whoever learned the ground well enough to survive it. That lesson doesn't age. It waits. And for anyone thinking about trying again, thinking the time has finally passed, thinking fear forgets. The island is still there, so is the ground, and it's still listening.